Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Today is the first webinar in the series that we will cover consumer math course throughout multiple sessions of webinars. So today is the first webinar that we're going to go over the first part of the first lesson, basic math skills. I just want to introduce myself before we go into the lesson. My name is Miriam. I'm your math instructor here at Penn Foster. I have been here with Penn Foster since 2015. I have recently earned my master's in urban education last year, and also I have a Pennsylvania math certification to teach secondary math in the state. Today's webinar, the way it's going to go is that we're going to go over some problems together. We're going to understand how to apply rules to different problems concerning today's topic, percents. After each topic, we're going to have a self-check question for you to try. Those questions are not graded. Those questions are given to you to evaluate your understanding. I will appreciate your participation, but if you do not participate or if you get the question incorrect, nothing will happen to your grade. If you have questions throughout the lesson, the raise your hand feature is not enabled in our webinar. So the way you want to ask your questions is to type them in the questions box. And once you type in your question, I will see a pop-up and I'll be able to see who asked the question and what the question is. Please keep the questions relevant to what we speak about within this webinar. Also, registrants for the webinar, whether you attend today or you couldn't do it today and attend with us, will receive a recording of the webinar sent to your email address that you have used when you first registered to the webinar. Today, we're going to talk about percents. So what is a percent? How can we change a percent from a different form of the regular percent form that we know with a sign to fraction or decimal? We're going to understand the different ways to do that. So today we're going to focus on changing percents to decimals and decimals to percents. Also, we're going to look at how to change percents to fractions and how to change fractions, or sometimes we're going to see mixed numbers to percents. Before we go into the calculations, I just want to refresh everyone's mind on what is a percent. And we hear in the news and in the radio and report on the economy or population or elections the term percent. So you often see or hear the term percent to represent a part out of a whole. So a percent is a portion of 100, and that's why we call it a per cent. So a cent is 1/100th of a dollar, for example, if you want to relate it that way. So we always reference that number before the percent sign to the number 100. So for example, I want to just give you an idea of what is a percent first before we go into the deep calculations on how to change the forms of a percent. If we are saying that 3/5 of a certain school, let's call it the night schools, they have scored satisfactorily in a state exam. So now we're using here the fraction 3/5 to compare a part of a whole. So that means that 3 students out of every 5 students in that school have scored satisfactorily in the state exam. So fractions is a way to compare a part out of a whole. Or percent also, I can say the same fraction, 3/5, I can say it represented in percent. I can say 60% of that same school have scored satisfactorily in the state exam. And if I want to go deeper into the meaning of 60%, I'm going to understand that as 60 students out of 100 students, they scored good on the state exam. So this is, just in brief, this is what percents means and how we use it in our lives. Now, let's do what the lesson asks us to do. We need to do some calculations to change the forms of percents. And the two forms that we need to learn how to change the percent to and from are the decimals and the fractions. So let's start with the really simple problems. So if we see the question here says, write each of the following percents as decimals. I need to change this term from 72% to a decimal. Throughout the lessons, throughout the webinar today, and maybe in the second webinar that we're going to do next week, you're going to notice that whenever we want to get rid of the percent sign, we always divide over 100. So that would be the main rule that we're going to go for. And then later on, you will see that whenever we want to bring in the percent sign, we multiply times 100. So let's start with question number 1. Change that percent 72% to just a decimal. How can we do that? Well, we're going to do exactly the same as we said. We're going to divide the 72 divided by 100. Now, you can use a calculator to do that, and it's going to give you the same answer. But remember when we learned back in General Math 1, and maybe if you have attended middle school and you didn't take our General Math 1 course, we always move the decimal point to the left or right if you multiply times or divide over any multiples of 10. So in that case, 72 is a whole number. And with whole numbers, we know that the decimal point exists right after the last digit here. So it is there, but we do not usually write it. So when we divide over 100, we move the decimal point twice to the left. So 1, 2. And here will be the new location of our decimal point. So the answer is 0.72. That is the answer. So 72% is equivalent to say, well, it's a 0.72. That's it. Let's do one more problem. 56.7%. What would be this in decimal form? The same thing. I want to get rid of the percent sign, then I'm going to divide. So because notice here the answer is in decimal, no percent signs there. So to get rid of that sign, we always divide. So 6.7 over 100, the same rule. Move the decimal point twice to the left. So we have a 56.7. The decimal point was here, 1, 2. So the answer would be 0.567. Why do I write a 0 on the far left of my decimal? This is a habit that I just wanted to keep. Sometimes when you read the number like this, sometimes, because the decimal point is a tiny sign, we sometimes oversee it. And instead of reading that as a 0.0 or 0.567, we may read it as 567, and that will make a big difference in our calculations if we use it that way. So I always like to write the 0 right before the decimal point just to make sure that I see that there is a decimal point there. So that would be the decimal form of this percent. Any questions? If you have questions, remember you can type them in the questions box. The raise your hand feature is not enabled. Okay, so let's take a self-check. And again, those self-checks for your peace of mind, they are not graded. I do not use them to assess you or anything like that. This is merely for your evaluation. You will see if you are good in that topic or you need to go back to the lesson and read and then do some practice questions. So the question is, write 209.87% as a decimal. What should we do to change this percent to a decimal? I'm going to make the question appear again a different format, and then you'll be able to actually select between the A, B, C, D answer choices provided. Okay, now you see the question, and you'll be able to click on the answer that you think is correct. Okay, remember, participation is encouraged. It will benefit you and me too. If most of you get the question incorrect, that means maybe I have to explain that topic differently. And if most of you got it correctly, I will know that my way is the right way of explaining that topic. And also it benefits you. It will give you an idea if you can just move on to the lesson to the next topic, or you need to go back after this webinar and re-study this topic. Okay, so let's do the question together, and then I'm going to share my final answer, and then you can compare your answer with my answer, and that way also you can evaluate yourself. I have that number. I'm trying to divide over 100. I want to get rid of this sign, so move the decimal point twice to the left, and the answer is 2.0987, and the answer is B. The correct answer is B. Okay, let's look at a different kind of question. And by the way, those light blue boxes I have on the top of the slides, it summarizes the rules that we use to get the answer for each kind of question that we go for below that box. So you can write these in your notes and keep them handy whenever you're doing the exam. You can just refer back to that. Instead of going to the lesson and try to flip over the pages just to find what to do in a specific case. So these are the rules that we use for each kind of problems. Express each of the following decimals as percents. So now we're going to do the opposite. We have the decimal form, but we need to represent that decimal in terms of a percent. So it means that we are trying to bring in the percent sign. And remember, we said whenever we bring in the percent sign, we need to multiply times 100. So we can simply take that number, 954, times 100. And then remember, when we divided over 100, we moved the decimal point to the left twice. Now, when we multiply, we do the opposite. We move the decimal point to the right twice. So that was here, 1, 2. So the decimal point now is a 0.954. The decimal point is between the 0 and the 9. So your answer is 0.954%. Remember, we multiply times 100 to bring in the form of a percent. So we need to have the percent sign in our answer. The same way, 9.87, it's a decimal number. We want to represent that in terms of a percent. Then multiply times 100. Multiplying times 100 is equivalent to moving the decimal point twice to the right. 1, 2. So it's going to be 987 and a decimal point. Well, in that case, this is a whole number because the decimal point now is to the far right of the number. So simply our answer is 987%, 987%. Any questions? Okay, let's go to the next slide, which is another question. Now we're doing the same thing. Change the decimal to a percent. So we want to bring in the sign for the percent. So we need to multiply times 100. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that and do the calculations, and then choose the right answer from the ones provided. Here you go. Okay. Thank you for everyone who decides to participate. Sometimes it's not that students do not want to participate or they just do not want to cooperate. It just may be the fear of math that they do not want to enter an answer and then they find out later it's a wrong answer. So I understand that fear because I was there once when I was younger. I had that fear of hearing that my answer was wrong, and that discouraged me a lot. So try to overcome that feeling, try to deal with numbers even if your answer is wrong. It's not the end of the world. We're learning. We're doing that webinar. You have your lessons, you can call. So it's not something that you have to run away from always. So try to encourage yourself and just use the methods that we do here in the webinar and you will get it. So change the decimal to a percent, multiply times 100. So that would be move the decimal 1, 2 to the right. So the answer is 2.971%. So the answer in this case is D. Any questions? Okay, so let's move on to another topic then. What if we want to change the percent given to a fraction? Now the things have become a little bit tougher. Whenever fractions are, in the process, you may expect some, extra work that you have to do. Okay, well, so my point is that percent needs to be represented in terms of fractions. Now, let's think about it. Let's go back to the rule. Whenever we want to get rid of the sign, the percent sign, divide over 100. So what I'm going to do exactly that. So 26 for question number 1, 26, and then I'm going to divide over 100. Why did I divide over 100? Because I want to delete this sign. I cannot just delete it. When I delete that sign, I need to do the equivalency of it, which is dividing over 100. Once you divide over 100, you're going to look at the bottom and the top. And remember, with fractions, if you've taken the General Math 1 course, or if you remember how to simplify fractions from when you were in school, we need to eliminate the common factors between 26 and 100. So we need to think about that. Well, the easy way to figure it out is we notice that 26 is an even number, 100 is an even number, then 2 for sure is a common factor. Eliminate the 2 by dividing over 2 and divide over 2. 26 over 2 is 13, and 100 over 2 is 50. Look at the bottom and the top, nothing common. 13 is a prime number. 50 has lots of factors, but none of the factors are common between 13 and 50. Then 13 over 50 is the fraction form for 26%. 13 over 50. Let's do that one more time. 119%. Put this in fractions. Well, we want to get rid of the sign, then take the 119 divided by 100 and try to simplify. Well, 119 and 100, they do not have anything in common. So we're going to just keep it like that. Since the 119 and 119 over 100 is not a proper fraction, remember we call that an improper fraction because the top number is greater than the bottom number. In that case, to simplify the fraction, we're going to represent it as a mixed number. 1 and 19 over 100. And the way I did that, just to refresh your memory, I'm going to ask myself, how many times 100 will go into 119? It's once. So that's why I have my 1. and then I'm going to calculate the leftover. Well, how much left over I have from the 119 if 100 goes only once into 119, which is 19, which is going to become the numerator, and the denominator always stays the same. So the fraction form of 119% is 1 and 19 over 100. That's it. So the main theme is that we divide over 100. The last problem on the screen, 45%. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. As you practice the different kind of problems, you will do it faster. I'm just doing it slow, so you are clear on the steps that we do and why. 45 over 100 to get rid of the sign. We have 45 and 100. We know that 5 is a common factor between 45 and 100. Divide over 5. So 45 over 100 is 9. And then 100 over 5, of course, is 20. 9 and 20, nothing else is common. Then your fraction form of 45 is 9 over 20. That's it. If you want to understand the relation between that percent and the fraction, if you see that 45 out of 100 people, they know how to, for example, speak the sign language in a certain company, for example. It is equivalent to saying, well, 9 out of 20 people in that company know how to speak the sign language. So it is different ways of representing part out of a whole, once with a percent and once with a fraction. That's it. Questions? Okay, let's move on to a question. Write 56% as a fraction. We want to get rid of the percent sign. Which fraction is equivalent to saying 56%? And here is the question, and please take the time to enter your answers. Okay, let's do that together. Omar, he wants to go over one more problem like that. So let's do that together. So again, our main theme is whenever we want to get rid of the percent sign and switch percent to fraction or decimal, we divide over 100. So we're going to do that. 56 over 100. And then I need to simplify. Why should I simplify a fraction? Well, we simplify fraction essentially to go or to get into the core value of a fraction. So if I tell you 12 over 24 or 1 over 2, which one is easier for you to visualize in your mind? 12 over 24 or 1 over 2, like a half? Which one? The same thing, the same way, the same reason. We simplify fractions to get to the essential core value of a fraction, so we're able to understand it better. So 56 and 100, common factors between the top number and the bottom number. Well, sometimes we need to use our skills, math skills, so we can go ahead and do the manual way. The manual way is so long, but it's going to get you to the answer, which is list all of the factors of 56, list all of the factors of 100, compare the two lists, and then circle the common factors, and then divide on the product of those common factors. That will get you to simplify the fraction, but this is a way too long of a method. Another method is just to notice that the two numbers are even. I mean, they're not even all the time in every single problem that you'll see, but in this specific problem, you have the advantage of having 56 even number and 100 an even number. With even numbers, it's a fact. Any two even numbers have 2 as a common factor. So I'm going to divide over 2 to eliminate the common factor. 56 over 2 will give you 28, and 100 over 2, of course, is a 50. Now, 28 and a 50 still are even numbers. Then there is another common factor we need to eliminate. Divide over 2 and divide over 2 equals 2. 28 over 2 is a 14, and then 50 over 2 is 25. 14 and 25, nothing common between 14 and 25, so that would be your answer. And the answer in this case would be C. C is the fraction form of 56%. I hope, Omar, that I answered your question on that type of a problem. Next, let's look at another kind of questions when you are trying to express fractions to percents. Now it's getting a little bit tougher. Now I have a fraction, not a percent. We have a fraction 7 over 20. We need to represent that fraction in terms of a percent. So instead of saying 7 people out of every 20 knows how to do a certain skill, we want to represent that fraction in terms of 100. How many out of 100 knows how to do that skill? We need to figure out that value. To do that, I need to remember my method. The general method that we go by is whenever you want to bring in the percent sign, you need to multiply times 100. And then there is another method. I'm going to just go over it with you if you want to do that as well. So let's do the general method. Multiply times 100 because we want to change a fraction or a decimal to percent. So I'm going to bring in my fraction, 7 over 20, and then I'm going to multiply that times 100 times 100. Remember, 100 is a whole number. I can represent that 100 in terms of a fraction by dividing over a 1. So now 100 over 1 is still equivalent to 100, but has the fraction form, which is I need to multiply a fraction 7 over 20 times 100 over 1. That is essentially equivalent to multiplying this fraction times the whole number 100. You can multiply across and then simplify, or use the cancellation method, and then that would be your answer, your product. So let's do this method. Let's multiply, let's cancel out any common factors between any number from the top with any number from the bottom. I'm looking at 120, 100 here and 20 there, 100 on the top and 20 on the bottom. I need to simplify that. What common factor exists between 100 and the number 20? It's going to be 20. Right? So I can divide top and bottom, divide over 20, and divide over 20. This is a process that is part of multiplying fractions. If you want to go to the Penn YouTube page, you will find 3 webinars on fractions: adding, subtracting, simplifying, multiplying, and dividing, if you want to refresh your memory on how to multiply fractions. So before we multiply, we do the cancellation method. So 7 over 1, because 20 over 20 is a 1, times 100 over 20 is 5 over a 1 here. And then, since nothing can be canceled out between 5 and 1, 5 and 1, nothing between 7 and 1 or 7 and 1, then go ahead and multiply across. 7 times 5 is 30. 5 over 1, which is 35. Then the percent form of 7 over 20 is 35%. Okay, so again, What we did, we wanted to bring in the percent sign. We multiply times 100. We just changed a little bit the 100 from a whole number form to a fraction form, dividing it by a 1, which is not going to affect the value of the 100, of course. And then we just normally multiplied the fraction times the 100 over 1, as we normally do with multiplying any two fractions. And then the product is the value of the percent. That is the general method here. This is the general method here. There is another method. I would like to go over it, and it's up to you if you want to use it or not. It's going to get you the same answer, but I just want to go over everything. So you choose what you want to use. Let's use the purple. Okay, now let's start over. We have 7 over 20. Now, isn't that going to be easier if that 20 was 100? If that 20 was switched to 100 somehow, we can just use the numerator and just put the percent sign after it, and that's it. So what I'm trying to do is I'm looking at the 20, and I realized that 20 is a factor of 100. Meaning that 20 times a whole number will give me 100. That makes 20 a factor of 100. Why 100? Because remember, the percent reference back to 100, some amount out of 100. So that's why I'm trying my best, knowing that 20 is a factor of 100. I know it's doable. I can simply multiply 20 times 5, do the same thing on the top to keep the fraction balanced, times 5, and that will give me an equal fraction to the original fraction, just with 100 in the denominator. That's it. Well, since 35 over 100 is equivalent to 35%, then that's it. That is it. So the first way is to multiply times 100. The second way is whenever the denominator is a factor of 100, I'm going to use that fact to my advantage. I'm going to multiply that denominator times a factor. In this case, the factor is 5, top and bottom. That will make the new denominator 100, and the numerator would be some kind of a number. That some kind of a number over 100 will translate to that kind of a number percent. And in our case, it's 35%. So both methods will get you to the same answer. It's up to you which one you want to use. Questions on that problem before I move on to question number 2? Okay, let's do the mixed number. So a mixed number is a form of a fraction. It just have a whole number with it. So we cannot do anything with a mixed number like that. I need to change the mixed number first to an improper fraction. To do that, if you remember, we multiply 3 times 5 and then add that to 2. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 2 is 17, and the denominator is the same, 5. So 17 over 5 is the improper fraction form of the given mixed number. I'm going to use 17 over 5. So I'm going to keep my colors consistent. So I'm going to use the first method first, 17 over 5. I'm going to multiply times 100. I want to bring in the percent sign. Now we can use the cancellation method. What is a common factor between 17 and 5? Nothing. 17 and 1, nothing. 105, yes. 5 is a common factor. Eliminate the 5. So divide both numbers over 5. 17 is the same. 5 over 5 is a 1 times. 100 over 5 is 20, and then over 1. Nothing common that I can eliminate further, so I'm going to multiply 17 times 20. And that will give me 340 over 1, which is really the same as saying 340. and our answer will have the percent sign. This is the first method. 340% is the same as saying 3 2/5. Or I can use the fact that the denominator is a factor of 100. So I'm gonna change the improper fraction to another equal fraction that has 100 in the denominator. So 5 times what will give you 100 times 20? Do the same thing on the top. Don't forget. Now multiply 17 times 20 will give you 340 over 100. Take the numerator and put the percent sign, and that will be your answer, 340%. So you have the two methods. Whatever you like to use, easier for you to use, makes more sense to you, you can use that. Other questions? Do you have any questions on this method? Okay. Let's move on to another set of problems. Well, it's the same topic. The only difference is we're going to have denominators that are not factors of 100. So we still have the general method, which is multiply the fraction times 100 and then do multiplication, and that's it. Or I can use an alternative method whenever the denominator is not a factor of 100. The way I'm going to use, so the general method, I'm not going to do it all the way, but I'm just going to remind you how to do that. 2 over 11 times 100 over 1, and then you do your calculations, and that will give you the answer. Or another method I want to go over is, well, we can simply, since 11 is not a factor of 100, we can simply divide 2 over 11. You can use your calculator. You can punch in 2 divided by 11, and that will give you a decimal value. The decimal value is 0.181 and 8, so on. Now, this is not what we are trying to get because we did not multiply times 100 yet. So the 0.1818 does not have the sign of the percent yet. We need to multiply times 100 first, and then we'll be able to put the percent sign. So multiplying times 100 is equivalent to moving the decimal point twice to the right. So the answer now is 18.18%. Questions? Anything that is not clear? Okay, let's do that one more time with the mixed number that we have on question number 2. The general method that you can do is change the mixed number 1 and 2 over 7 to an improper fraction form. The improper fraction form would be 1 times 7 is 7 plus 2 will give you a 9, and 7 will stay in the denominator. Take that and do the 9 over 7 times the 100 over 1 and finish your solution. That is the general method to work with any kind of denominator, whether it's a factor or not a factor of 100. Another way, I'm just giving you alternatives. Another way, take your calculator and divide 9 divided by 7 equals 2. Will give you a decimal number. This is not your answer. So 1.2857 and so on is the quotient. It's not the percent. Now to make it a percent, multiply times 100. Move the decimal point twice to the right. 1, 2. So the answer now is 128.57%. And that would be your answer. If you do not like to use a calculator for dividing 9 over 7, you can go ahead and do the long division. Me personally, if you want to take my opinion for it, we are not learning here how to divide. We are learning how to change a fraction to a percent. So I do not like to get stuck on how to divide, where my main focus here is to learn how to change a fraction to a percent. But you can go ahead and use the long division if you'd like. Questions? Okay. Let's do a self-check. So write 4 and 3/5 in terms of a percent. That should say a percent. So we're changing that fraction to a percent. How can we do that? Remember, we're trying to bring in a percent sign. So I'm going to put the question. You can have your time, take your time, don't get scared. Nothing will happen if you get it wrong. So that is the question, and here you go. Okay, let's do the problem in the two methods. So you're clear on what to use. Now, 5 is a factor of 100. So in my mind, one of the methods that I may consider is changing the improper fraction to an equal fraction with 100. And then the general method that is applicable any case, that would be multiplying the improper fraction times 100. So let's do that. And that is the most challenging topic in that area in the lesson. So I'm trying to slow down and do more examples so you're clear on what to do. So the question, I have 4 and 3/5. I cannot use the mixed number as is. I need to change it to an improper fraction. How? Multiply. 4 times 5 is 20 plus 3 is 23 on the top over 5. Okay, now I can use that. Well, I can either multiply times 100 because I want to bring in the percent sign. In that case, remember, I need to eliminate the common factors between a number from the top with a number from the bottom. I see 100 and the 5 will have a 5 in common. So eliminate the 5. Then 23 over 1 times 20 over 1. Nothing else to be eliminated, so go ahead and multiply across. 23 times 20 will give you 460. 1 times 1 is a 1, so the answer is 460%. Or I can notice and take advantage of 5 in the denominator being a factor of 100. So let's start over from the beginning. 23 over 5. I need to change the 5 to 100 times 20 and do the same thing on the top times 20. Well, 23 times 20 is 460 and 5 times 20 is 100. Take the numerator and add the percent sign, and that would be the answer. The answer in this case is C. C is the correct answer. Okay, let's move on to another way to represent fractions, percents, decimals, and so on. Now, that question too is one of the challenging questions, and so students get overwhelmed with having a fraction and a percent and the same line. So do not get, overwhelmed or scared. Let's do that one step by one step and you'll get how to do it. Now, the main idea, I need to get rid of the sign. So to get rid of the percent sign, we divide over 100. We divide over 100. So that rule stays. So let's do that. I'm going to take my fraction, 5 over 7. I'm going to divide the fraction over 100. That may seem so strange to you to see that, but we're going to have a main denominator of 100. In that case, there is a rule about fractions that says the denominator that appears in the numerator gets multiplied to the main denominator to make it a simpler fraction. So this is a complex fraction because we have a fraction in the numerator. So again, to simplify that complex fraction, we multiply the denominator of the numerator, 7, times the main denominator, 100. So now I'm going to multiply these. So the fraction now will look like that, 5 over 700. Now, I did divide over 100 already, so I am able to get rid of the sign. The only thing I have missing is to simplify the fraction. 5 and 700. Any common factors that you have in mind for that? 5. Remember, any number that ends with a 5 or ends with a 0 have a common factor of a 5, which is the case that we have 5 and 700. So, over 5 and over 5. 5 over 5 is a 1. And then we have the 700 over 5. It will give you 140. Then the fraction form of the 5/7 percent is 1 over 40. A common mistake I want to share with you that I've noticed when I was talking to students is when I ask that question, what is 5 over 7% in fractions? They would just immediately go ahead and say, oh, it's 5 over 7. No, it's not 5 over 7. It's 1 over 140. Okay, another question, mixed number with a percent sign, even more overwhelming, but we know the way. The general method is we want to remove the sign, divide over 100. Since it's a mixed number, we cannot use it as is. Change it to an improper fraction. So the 10 and 2/5 is equivalent to 10 times 5 is 50. And then plus 2, that will give you 52, and the denominator stays. That is the improper fraction we're going to use. And then we still have the percent sign, by the way. Okay? And then we want to get rid of the sign, then divide over 100. Exactly the same thing as the other question. 52 over 5 over 100. Multiply the 5 times the 100 to simplify the complex fraction. 52 over 500. Okay, well, I see that 52 and 500 are even numbers. Divide over 2. We try now to simplify the answer. 52 over 2 will give you 26 over 500 over 2 will give you, of course, 250. Still even numbers. Divide over 2, divide over 2. 26 over 2 is 13. 250 over 2 is 125. 13 and 125, nothing common. So the answer, the fraction form of this percent is 13 over 125. Questions? Anything that was not clear? Okay, let's move on. Question. Write 1 3/7% as a fraction. How can we do that? Okay, let's do the same thing. So I'm going to leave you do it, and then we can go back and do it together. So here's the question, and you can begin thinking of the question and choosing your answers. Okay, let's do the question together. So the same thing, it's a mixed number. I cannot use it as is. So I'm going to switch the mixed number to 10 over 7% and then divide. So 10 over 7 divided by 100, and that will become 10 over 700. We know we can just cancel out the zeros, and that would be 1 over 7. This is the fraction form of this percent, and the answer is B. If you did get the question incorrect, it does not mean that you will never understand the topic. It just means that you need maybe to be careful when you do the calculations. Maybe you need to rewatch the webinar, but you will get it at the end. Okay, next. Now, how to change a percent with fractions to the decimal form, to a decimal source. So for the previous couple of slides, we did see how to change a fraction percent to a fraction. Now we're going to see how to change a fraction percent to a decimal. So now things may seem so, complicated for you to understand in 1 hour, but when you rewatch the webinar, go with the lesson, read word by word, do practice questions, you will know what to do whenever you see a question. You will know, okay, it's a fraction percent to a decimal, let's do that. Okay, so the way we're going to do it is we're going to think about the general method. So the general method is to divide over 100 because we want to get rid of the sign. We want to have just only a decimal number. So we can divide, although we cannot divide using the mixed number that we have. So change it to an improper fraction. So multiply 12 times 5 is 60 plus 1 is 61 over 5. So that is equivalent to 61 over 5%. Now divide. So 61 over 5 over 100 to get rid of the sign. And then we know the rule, 61 over 500. And then that would be the fraction form, but the question is asking to switch it to decimal. So all you need to do is to pick up your calculator and divide 61 over 500 equals to, and that will give you the decimal form of that fraction, 0.122. And that is the decimal form of this fraction. Okay, now there is another way. I want to share that with you. So you have all the options. Now, instead of dividing over 100 as a first step, I can do it last. Okay, how? I'm going to take the fraction. I'm going to take the fraction, which is the improper fraction in that case because we only can use that form, 61 over 5. I'm not going to divide over 100 yet. I'm going to divide 61 over 5, and that will give me a decimal form of that fraction, 12.2. But this is not our answer because we did not divide yet over 100. Now we divide over 100, and that will make us move the decimal point twice to the left. So now that decimal point will be 1, 2 to the left. So that would be 0.122, the same answer as above. So that is another way. The only difference is in the first method, we just divided the first step. The second method, we divided last. But it's the same method. Whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever makes sense to you to do, then that would be the method you want to go for. Question number 2. Same thing, 7 over 25. I'm not going to change anything in that fraction. It's already a proper fraction. So I'm going to either go ahead and divide 7 over 25 over 100. That will become a 7 over 2500, and then try to simplify. There is no simplification. Well, I need the decimal form, so I'm going to just divide 7 over 2500, and that will give me the decimal form of my percent. It will give me the final answer. That would be the final answer. Or I can do the division last. How? I'm going to do 7 over 25. I'm going to switch that to decimal. So I'm going to divide using my calculator. I'm going to do 7 over 25 will give me a decimal form. But this is not the answer. We need to divide over 100. So that will make us switch the decimal form, the decimal point 1, 2. So we have to fill in the blank with a 0. So the answer is 2 zeros and then 2, 8 to the right of the decimal point. That's it. Questions? Okay. Question for you to answer. 2 and 5 over 12% is what in decimals? So again, the method that we have in our mind, we want to get rid of the percent sign, then divide. You want to divide first or last, it's not going to matter. Just do the division correctly, the decimal point switched correctly, and you will get to the right answer. And here is the question. Okay, let's do that together. We have 2 and 5 over 12. It's a mixed number. We cannot use that, so switch it to the improper fraction. The improper fraction form is 29 over 12. You either divide over 100 now, or decide on the decimal form of 29 over 12 and then divide over 100. It's up to you. But either way, it will give you the answer C. C would be the decimal form of that percent. Any questions here before we move on? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now write each of the following percents as fractions. Now, we have a decimal percent. We want to change it to the fraction form. What should we do? Okay, main theme is divide over 100 because we want to get rid of the percent sign. So this is what we're going to do. Before we do that, though, we want to change the decimal form here to a fraction form. This is how we're going to do it. So the decimal that we are starting with is 2.72. Away from the percent, to represent that in terms of a fraction, I can write it as 272 with no decimal points over 100. Remember how to represent decimal numbers into fractions. It doesn't have to do anything with percents. This is how we switch a decimal number to a fraction form. So this is the fraction. This is the decimal actually. Divide over 100 to get rid of the sign. Now we got into the percent part. Equals to, and we know what to do in that case. If we have a denominator and the numerator, we're going to do 272 over multiply, that will be 10,000. And then simplify, even number than 2 is a common factor. Okay, so 272 over 2 will give you 136. 10,000 over 2 will give you 5,000. Well, still we have even numbers, divide over 2 and divide over 2. I'm going to finish here. So 136 over 2 will give you 68, and 5,000 over 2 will give you 2,500. Still even numbers, I have more to eliminate, equals to 68 over 2 will give you 34. You can use your calculators, by the way, to divide over 2. You're not expected to do long divisions every time you want to divide. 2,500 over 2 is 1,250. Still even numbers over 2 and over 2. 34 over 2 is a 17. It's a prime number over 625, and that's it. Since 17 is a prime number, prime numbers have only a factor of 1 in itself, then that would end the simplification process. So the fraction form is 17 over 625. Okay, so again, I'm going to just touch base on what did we do exactly. Remember when we had the mixed number as a fraction and then we have to change it to an improper fraction first? That step is equivalent to, in the decimal area, is equivalent to changing the decimal here to a fraction. And then I can use that fraction to divide over 100 and then so on, because my end goal is a fraction. So I cannot keep it as a decimal and just work with it. I have to, at certain point, change the decimal to a fraction and then divide. Let's do the second problem. 0.32%. Okay, we want it in fraction. We want to get rid of the percent sign, then divide. So my initial decimal is 0.32. Well, that is equivalent to 32 over 100. And then, and remember that is still in percent, I did not divide over 100 for the percent sake. So it's still, the percent sign is there. Now I'm going to divide the equivalency of the decimal over 100 to get rid of the sign. So that big denominator is for the decimal, is for the, the percent sign to get rid of it. So now we know 32 over 10,000. And then you're going to simplify until you're going to divide over 2. I'm not going to go over all of the simplification, but you're going to divide over 2 and keep dividing over 2 until you get to the 2 over 625. That is the fraction form. 2 and 625, nothing come between 2 and that number, then that is it for your fraction, and that would be your final answer. That would be your final answer. Any question? Anything that wasn't clear? I want to put some dots here, so if you happen to pause the presentation on that, so my math would be correct. So that is like do multiple steps until you get to the final fraction. Okay? Same thing, write 0.6% as a fraction. What should we do? Remember, our end goal is a fraction, but we are starting out with a decimal. So I need to change that 0.6 to a fraction and then divide over 100 to get rid of the sign and then simplify. I'm going to put up the question and you can have your time to figure out the answer. Here you go. Okay, let's go over that problem, and I want to show you that when we switch a decimal to a fraction, we do not always divide over 100. It depends on the decimal that you have. So I'm going to start out with 0.6%. To change that to the fraction form, it's actually 6 over 10 because we have only one decimal place. If I want to go back to the previous slide and show you why I divided over 100 here, because remember here we have 1, 2 places, decimal places. That's why to get rid of the decimal, point, I'm going to count how many decimal places, and that would be how many zeros in my multiple of 10. I'm going to divide over. So 2 zeros and then a 1 before that, that would be 100. That's why I decided it's 100, not a 10. Same thing here. There was no whole number, I don't care, but two decimal places to the right of the decimal point. To change that decimal to a fraction, I need to divide over a number that has 2 zeros and a 1. It's 100. I'm just trying to make it simple so we remember what to do. Now, in this question, we're going to divide over the 10. And why? Because we have only one place to the right of the decimal point. So 6 over 10 is equivalent to 0.6. Okay, and that is still a percent. To get rid of the sign, divide over 100. 6 over 10 over 100. A complex fraction, we know what to do. 6 over 1,000. To multiply 10 times 100, that would be 1,000. And then simplify, divide over 2, and divide over 2, and that would be 3 over 500. Nothing come between 3 and 500. That would be your final answer. 3 over 500 is the same as saying 0.6%. Questions? Any questions that didn't appear on this webinar that you expected to be here? What I try to do in this webinar is to mix and match the different kind of problems that is the discussion of your lesson. Switching a fraction percent to a decimal, switching a decimal percent to a fraction, switching a percent decimal to a decimal, and so on. If you want to rewatch that webinar, that would be a good thing to do. And you may want to maybe watch one part of this webinar, go to the lesson, read the corresponding, problems, do some practice questions, and then come back to the webinar, watch another topic, and then go to the lesson, and so forth, until you're confident on what to do in any kind of a problem that you see in the exam like that. Okay, that will conclude the math part of my webinar. We went over the different forms of expressing percents, percents to fractions, percents to decimals, and so forth. Now, what to do for the exam? There's no escape from reading the lesson. You need to read the lesson. If you watch me doing the math and you don't do it yourself and understand why we do things, this is how people learn. They have to read. They have to pick up the pen or pencil and do the math on paper and do mistakes and learn. So you need to study the unit. You need to practice the question. Maybe you want to rewatch the webinar. Make sure that you take advantage of the practice questions or discover more questions. Answer key are provided for you within the lesson, so use that as a reference. And also an outside resource that's not with Penn Foster. It's free, khanacademy.org. On the top left of the page, click on subjects, pre-algebra, and then they have a series of more videos on how to change percents to different forms if you want to use it. If not, then you don't have to. Well, how to use the help provided for this course? You can call the number between 9 to 6 Eastern times on weekdays. Another way is to schedule an appointment using that link. That link will allow you to schedule appointments for different kind of courses. You will choose which one that you want the appointment with. You can SMS your question. Please keep it a brief question, or chat if you have, again, a brief question, or you can email. Lots of you do not know where to go to email the school, and that's why I brought that screenshot. Some of you will have this kind of a screen. To email the school, you want to click on Help Center, and then click on Find Answers, Ask a Question, and then click on the search button with no typing of any kind of keywords, and then click on Ask a Question, and then type in your question in that form. Or your account may look like that. Click on Help and Support, and then click on the search button with no keywords. Click on Contact Us, and then you are able to write your questions, the subject of your question. The department's not gonna really, matter. The department and the support type, just, pick anything that you think is the right thing. You do not have to upload any file if you don't have any files, and then hit continue, and that's it. With that page, you notice here there's a chat feature, and there's a chat feature on both versions of the accounts. You can go ahead and click the chat if you have a brief question on your course. And at the end, I want to thank you. I am over the time, over the hour, but thanks for your attendance and your attention throughout the session. There is a 3-question survey. If you would like to take that and give me a feedback on how I did throughout the webinar, that will help me improve myself and do better in the upcoming webinars. If you have any questions, general questions on the course or the program, I'll be happy to answer them now. If not, then you can email or call or chat your questions. So I'm going to wait for a few seconds and see if you have any questions for me before I leave. Okay, I will wish everyone good luck in the exam. Do your best. Do not give up. You will do better and you will get it. So I'm here for help. We have a great staff to help as well. Good luck in the exam, and I'll see you next week for the second session.